The topic that we have today is something that is not going to need, it's not a training where I'm going to be teaching. It's something that I need us to discuss because it is something that as a society, we really need to sit down and have a consideration for. So if you can just introduce yourself. I see Marco Nyoro Abal is from Jewel River County, Western Bar. Welcome very much. Good afternoon, Paul, to you too. Good afternoon, David. I'm so sorry about your sickness. I'm really, really sorry. Good afternoon, Rufina and Christombella Knight from Capoeira. Good afternoon to you all. Welcome. So I'm going to start sharing my, please let me know if you can see it. All right. Hi, everybody. Can you see my my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Yes, yes.
Okay. So the training for today, we're going to be looking at reporting gender-based violence, discrimination, and promoting gender equality. And why we are doing this is that gender-based violence, as it is a really complicated and sensitive subject. And when it comes to reporting on such sensitive topics, it means that you're reporting on something that is almost considered taboo. Not very many people like talking about it and talking about it openly. And it's the matters that are being discussed are kind of distressing. So it's challenging for everyone. It's challenging for us in terms of communication. It will be challenging for you in terms of you being journalists, whether in traditional media or even on social media. So I hope that today we can discuss how we can do that ethically and what kind of guidelines we can follow. Yeah. And so the objectives for today's session will be increasing our knowledge and understanding, because I know we already have the knowledge. So what we're trying to do is sort of increase this knowledge bank that we have on understanding the issues of gender and gender-based violence. We want to help equip each other, because I said this is a discussion, we want to equip each other with how to thoughtfully handle gender-based violence issues. Because if there's one thing in covering any sort of issues to do with just generally violence, but then when you go a step further, and this is gender-based violence, we need to look at the sensitivity of the issue. So we need to learn how to thoughtfully handle these issues, how to protect the safety of the people who are speaking out, and protect the lives of the survivors. Yeah. The third thing we hope to do by the end of this training is to raise awareness on reporting on gender issues, and to discuss stories of, women's equality, and look at the successful stories of women who are breaking barriers and overcoming challenges. And so for each of those, I am hoping that because, like I said, we're already starting from a point of knowledge. So I hope you will bring in the knowledge that you have, and I bring in the knowledge that I have, and we can have sort of a discussion. So before we go any further, like I had already asked you to introduce yourself, your name, should you, like, it can be your institution or just generally your location where you are. We would like to see where you are, how many people are joining us from where. And also, we would like to observe, because we have a very short time, we only have 2 hours to discuss such a serious topic. And we're going to apply what we call the 3 Ds. And the first 3 is disturbance. So I'm going to ask everyone, if you're not the one talking, just put yourself on mute. so that we do not have unnecessary interruptions, maybe somebody speaking in the background, there's a phone going off. So that's the first thing I would ask you. The second thing is discouragement. When we come together to discuss, there's nothing like a wrong answer or something incorrect you're saying. So what we're trying to do is either give our opinions, give our experiences. And when that happens, there's no need of coming to discourage someone and telling them, oh, you know, what you're saying is not correct. What you're saying is not right. So we are going to try as much as possible not to discourage each other. So whenever you bring up a point or somebody from the team brings up a point, I would like us to be very open in discussing and in seeing everybody's point of view. And last but not least, I do not encourage dullness. In as much as we're discussing a topic that is a bit heavy, if we can just try and, you know, be a bit, contribute to the discussion, then you can come out of here, because I don't have all the knowledge. Maybe something that somebody else wants is with you. You're the one who knows. You're the one who has that opinion that somebody else will take from here, even more than they take from me. So I would ask that if you have something to contribute and if you have something to say, please don't just sit with it. So let me get back to the chat and see if we have more. Julieta, Elizabeth Agum from Juba, welcome. Chol Ayik, Chol, broadcasting journalist and a presenter. That's amazing. Welcome. David Loremo from Kapwet. Good to have you here. Good to have you here as well, David. Paul J. Sam, welcome. Lokori Peter. I see we have quite a number today. So I'm going to be expecting a lot from you. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing we're going to discuss, when you hear about issues of reporting on gender-based violence, reporting on discrimination, and promoting gender equality, what's the first thing that comes to your mind in relation to your work? Whenever somebody just broaches the topic, whether it's in conversation, you're reading the newspaper, you're watching something on TV, or we are having a training like this, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And I want you to write that for me in the chat. I want us to discuss, yeah? So tell me what comes to your mind when you think about this topic. And it could be either the topic of gender-based violence, it could be the topic of discrimination based on gender, or it could be the issue of promoting women's equality. But let me know, what is it that comes to your mind first when you think about it? Please just write your answers in the chat, or you could just, if it's okay, just unmute yourself and give us a quick answer, if that is easier for you. Yeah, guys, I don't need something much, just, oh yeah. So, Adobe, what comes to your mind is, how does this topic relate to me? What am I trying to address and how will it be received? It's a good question. Write info and skill, how to deal with GBV. That's interesting. Hi, Rufina. Anything else? Please just let me know. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Doesn't have to be a long explanation. Just tell me what exactly you think of when you hear such topics, in relation to your work though, in relation to your work, whether you're working on traditional media or online media. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about issues of reporting on gender-based violence or reporting on discrimination, gender-based discrimination, or promoting equality, gender equality? Work attack, stop blaming the victim. Okay, that's a really good one. Another thing, how will I handle this topic? What sources? That's really good. Okay, so I feel like we have covered some bases, and I see we have some topics that are in the presentation that we are going to talk about. So let's move on. And the first thing we're going to discuss is gender-based violence and what it is. So for just the purposes of providing a definition so that we all understand what you're talking about. So when I'm talking about gender-based violence, we use it as sort of just an umbrella term. It's not one thing, because for a lot of people, when they think about gender-based violence, they just think about either somebody being hit or somebody being sexually attacked. But it is an umbrella term for any harmful act that is perpetrated against somebody's will. And what makes it gender-based is that that attack is specifically based on that person's gender. That is happening because they're of a certain gender. Yeah. And it can be defined into 5 categories. The first one being sexual violence, which for a lot of us, that is what GBV means to us. And sexual violence can include rape or sexual assault, sexual harassment. But this is happening, like we have said, due to the fact that this person comes from a certain gender. And so that the fact that they are from that certain gender then gives them, makes them susceptible to this kind of violence. So it can be, this is a very broad classification because it can be classified into very many different categories, but the really 5, the broadest categories we have is sexual violence. The second one can be physical violence. And this, in other terms, it's also called, in some places, intimate partner violence, which is part of it, which is domestic. It can happen in the domestic space, or it can happen outside. So physical violence based on whatever gender you are, and that will include hitting you, slapping you, any kind of beating, like any sort of violence that is meted on you physically. The third one is emotional violence, which includes psychological and verbal abuse, which a lot of people do not include when it comes to the issues of gender-based violence, but it is a really, really, really big part of it. You do not have to experience physical violence. You don't need to be hit for it to be considered violence. So issues of psychological and verbal abuse are also very, very, very rife. The third thing is economic violence, which we also call financial abuse. And this is, restricting everything to do with you. You're denied resources to either go to the hospital or go visit someone, or just you yourself, maybe you work and your financial resources are taken away from you and you have no control over either your finances or finances in your home. So that kind of violence is also classified under GBV. And then we have some very harmful traditional practices, including child marriage, female genital mutilation, and so-called honor killings. And these are mostly location specific. And the problem with a lot of this is there are people who make this look like a cultural thing. Let's say this is our culture. But if it is a harmful practice, if it's a harmful traditional practice, and it is harming, people, then I think those cultures, you need to go back and look at them and see, are these cultures really helping people? Yeah. And the one thing we need to make very clear when we talk about gender-based violence is that violence in itself happens to everyone. Violence happens to both genders. But the fact is women and girls are usually quite, by a very large margin, this affects them way more than it affects any other person. So that's why when we talk about gender-based violence, a lot of it will be sort of looked at towards women because they are by far like the victim base. They form a very large part of the victim base, but the gender-based violence can be towards anyone. But for the purposes of this training, we're going to look at it a bit heavily more on the issue of women and girls. Yeah. So when it comes to gender-based violence, there are usually some, I want to say, myths that surround it. Yeah. So I want just anyone, one of us, to come up and just tell us what kind of myths do you think people believe when it comes to GBV? Because there are those beliefs that people have and have held, whether due to ignorance, due to commonly held misconceptions or anything. So there are those myths that keep on coming up and coming up and coming up about GBV. So is there anyone who would have an example of one of them, a myth, when it comes to gender-based violence? You can either write in the chat again, or you can just unmute yourself and tell us. I will start us off by one. Maybe I can give you an example. And one of the myths that people hold is that gender-based violence affects a certain type of person. And most of the time we look at it as it affects people who are either uneducated or people without resources or people in a certain class. They usually look at it like it's a class problem, gender-based violence. But the truth is, GBV has no class. It is not a respecter of religion. It's not a respecter of financial capability. It's not a respecter of education level. And any single person can be a victim of GBV. Yeah. So, is there any other myth that you have heard, or any response maybe to what I have said? You have a question, anything? Again, either write it on the chat or just unmute yourself and let me know. Yeah. So people believe that GBV is most for women and girls in most cases, Giulietta. Yes, that is very true. So like I've made it very clear, there are people who do not believe that there can be gender-based violence meted at men, which is a very harmful myth and a very harmful opinion to hold, because, see, in these opinions that we hold, they have ramifications, real-world ramifications. So if a man goes through gender-based violence, they might not have, or a boy or a man, they might not have that courage to come out and say it, because people don't believe you. They're like, what are you talking about? You're a man. These things do not happen to men. And so in that case, they do not get the help that they need. They do not get the resources that are channeled towards women and girls that experience these things. And so such myths really, really hurt the process when we are trying to come up with ways to solve these issues. Thank you very much, Giulietta. That's true. Another myth is that people do believe only the powerful people are only people doing GBV. Oh, that's also true. GBV, like I said, it's classless. It does not matter who you are, what position you hold in society, whether you're high up, you're low up, it happens all across the board. Yeah. So another myth, and this is directly to do with reporting, is that most people believe that when somebody has gone through gender-based violence, whether sexual violence or physical or anything, there's a way, like if you're coming to interview someone or you're talking to someone, there's a way we expect them to behave. Like somebody is very distraught, they look very affected physically. And if that person does not look like they're affected, we say, oh, this person is lying. They did not do those kind of things. This thing did not happen to them. Did you see how relaxed they were during the interview? Did you see how she was just talking anyhowly, or he was just talking like this? This thing did not happen. So in reporting, we need to be very careful and understand that people respond differently to things. So the way one person responds is not the way another person will respond. So if you come with preconceived beliefs and notions and say, I'm going to, maybe you are reporting on another story and you say, oh, this person was alleging that this and this happened to them. But when you looked at them, they appeared, they were laughing, they were smiling. So maybe perhaps this did not happen to them. So that is also a myth. How people react to gender-based violence, the victim themselves, I'm talking about, the survivors, how they react to it can vary from person to person. So believing that somebody did not go through this, or if somebody went through this, they have to behave a certain way, can also be very, very harmful to the process. Many societies, believe that women are weak and cannot perform duties that men does. Oh yeah, that's very true in terms of discrimination. There's that really, really commonly held belief. Rufina Isaac is saying you came across a story of a young girl with a disability be raped. That is one thing that people really do not consider. And when we look at women, there's a way we miss like other categories, because you're a woman, there's that whole category of women, but then there's women who are even more at risk. And one of them is women and girls with disabilities. That happens a lot, especially in places where these girls, because they're not able to leave the house and their parents have to go work because, you don't live in a setting that has a lot of money. They do not have money to get you somebody to watch you during the day. And so that child who has disabilities is left in the house alone. There has been so many cases, especially here in Nairobi where I am, in the more low-income areas. It's a really bad problem. Yeah, thank you so much for pointing it out, Rufina. And so when we are aware of this myth and the sort of biases that we may have moving into reporting gender-based violence, then that makes us, I think, better journalists. It makes us understand the stories of the victim more, because what we try to do in terms of writing stories about this is try to take a more survivor-centered approach, not an approach to castigate, just an approach to sort of understand the person's side of the story. Lochapio Elizabeth is saying some men tend to rape their wives at home and sometimes they tend to shy away from reporting it since people will look at it as not being true. Again, very true. There has been discussions in my country about the issue of marital rape. And a lot of people believe, especially as Africans, since, if you're my husband and you've paid my dowry, I belong to you, and then I cannot say no to you. And people don't really believe in the issue of marital rape. So the issue of wives being raped by their own husbands, people believe that is not a thing. And yeah, that is just, thank you for pointing it out. Another myth is that GBV should be done by those who are not responsible in the society. Yes, Kwong Mabiel, very true. So whenever there's an issue comes up, it's somebody who is very highly placed. It's a CEO of somewhere, or somebody who is elected into office, maybe a football star, and people say, why would that person do that? This is a very educated person, very high up in society. What we expect those things to be happening, to be done by the people who are just out here drunk on the streets. And GBV, both the perpetrator and the victim, there is never one point you can come and say victims look like this, perpetrators look like this. It's just, they look like anybody. They look like the person next door, your neighbor, your parent, your child, your uncle, your teacher, your boss, everyone. Okay, Rufina, you say what you meant is that this man believed she could not explain. Oh, that's quite interesting. So because she was deaf, they thought she could not explain herself. That's interesting. Emotional violence is less recognized. Yes, Gilletta, we do not recognize. We say, so the minute you say you're going through gender-based violence, and then people will ask you the first question: have you been hit? Did he beat you? If the answer is no, then people say that was not, any sort of violence. And we need to do more to create awareness on the issue of the various forms of violence, whether it's economic violence, the financial violence, whether it is emotional violence. We need to do a lot more in order to come up and explain, because as journalists, the role of media in the issue of reporting gender-based violence, discrimination, and promoting gender equality is usually twofold. The first one is reinforcing already existing social and cultural norms. That which we already know. We know you should not do this, you should not hit somebody else, you should not do this. Those things that we know, maybe FGM is harmful. So we need to reinforce those things over and over. But the second thing is educating the society by providing new ideas. So if you understand that, people hold on to these norms and they hold on to these views. So as journalists, you can come in and show them and show there's another way to think about this. So when you do your reporting ethically and you follow the guidelines that underpin good journalism, then you can educate the society on something. Men believe they are strong and they cannot report anything their wife isn't there. Like we've said, Carissa William, that is true. A lot of men are ashamed, not just reporting, even your own friends, your own peers. What can you tell them? Here in Kenya, there's people say whenever maybe a man faces violence in his own home, he'll always lie that he was walking and he met with thieves and they beat him, because they cannot admit to it. And this is an issue of society, for us not be open enough to say this thing can happen to anyone. A victim we do not have, we always know what a victim looks like, but we need to scrap that and know that a victim can look like anyone. It can look like you, it can look like me, it can look like your neighbor. And so those beliefs that we hold are not only limiting us, they're preventing gender-based violence survivors and victims from seeking help, from getting the help that they need, and from stopping the situations that they're in. Okay, so you will allow me to move on from there. And we talk about gender discrimination, sort of have a bit of a definition for it as well. So gender discrimination describes a situation in which you're treated differently just because you're either male or female, just because of your gender, you're treated differently, rather than on the basis of your individual skill, on your individual capabilities. This can happen anywhere. This can happen at work. This can happen on the streets. It can happen in your own family. The kind of things maybe you are told to do versus what your sibling, who is either a male or female, is expected to do. It can happen at work. It can happen in school. It can happen really anywhere, even online. Generally, online, there's a whole lot of that. So gender discrimination can be through direct discrimination, which is just, you can see it. Somebody tells you, oh no, I'm not doing this because you're a woman or you're a man. You go look for a job and they tell you, we don't employ women here. That is direct discrimination. Or for example, there's a time I went to a job interview and they directly asked me, do you plan on getting children anytime in the next 5 years? So that means if my answer is a yes, they will not employ me. They will not ask a man that same question. They will ask me, they will not ask them. So there's direct discrimination that is based on your gender. There's indirect discrimination. It's something you cannot really come out and say, this thing is happening, but you can actually just see it. It seems as down on the surface, but you cannot really come out and like go to HR and say, oh, you know, this is happening because, you know, I'm a woman. But it's indirect, but it actually still happens. The third one is harassment, which a lot of people have to go through in their daily lives, and also victimization, just based on the fact that you come from this particular gender or the other. It's not based on anything you have done. It's not based on anything that people can see, either on your skills or anything. No, you're just being harassed simply because you're either a woman or you're a man. Yeah. And when we talk about, the guidelines that underpin reporting on violence against women, because reporting on violence is usually quite sensitive. You cannot just report the way you report everything else, but the basic principles are the same, and the ethical principles which underpin the best practices as a journalist, they should guide you in the way that you report gender-based violence. And that is, number one, be very follow the truth wherever it may lead you. Because the issue about reporting is you go look for whatever it is that is the truth, you make sure. And there's this saying by some American guy called Matt Dillahunty. He says, in life, his aim is to believe as many true things as possible and as little false things as possible. So I think even in reporting, in the way I do my work, I try to write as many true things as possible, because you cannot really know. You also rely on sources. You rely on people to tell you, you rely on other publications, you rely on seeing something through video, audio, but you should strive as much as possible to make sure your reporting is the truth as it happened. So number one thing you should look for is truth. The second thing is accuracy, because something can be true, but it can lack like the very fact details, yeah, that should be very accurate. And number three is objectivity. And this comes to the issue of, as you are reporting, you are bringing issues that are coming from somewhere and you're taking them to the ears of somebody else. Now, what you believe as a person, sometimes your biases will have a bit of an effect on maybe what stories you want to put out, how you write it, but as much as possible, just try to be objective. Just write, if something has happened, lay down the facts as they are, because even if you're reporting, whether it's for anything, for politics, for sports, if your sports team lost, you're not going to go there and start angrily writing something. No, it's just reporting as it happened. So we try to be very objective. I know the issues of gender and violence, especially sexual violence, is something that is a really, really hot topic. But if you try and retain your objectivity and whatever it is you're writing, you, to the best of your knowledge, is the truth, and you're very accurate in reporting the details, because people will start picking up, people who do not want to believe the story that you've put out. You can say on the 19th of May, this happened. Unfortunately, it happened on the 20th of May. And some people will come and say, you see, this whole thing is a lie because you were not accurate in your details. So these three ethical principles, which guide us when you do our reporting and our writing, should also guide us when we're doing stories to do with GBV. And what can affect your reporting of GBV and discrimination is insensitive interviewing techniques, which we are going to talk about, inaccurate reporting, personal biases, and your own perceptions about gender and sexuality, and lack of understanding of the legalities of criminal cases. Because in some parts, large parts, of course, issues of violence, I don't think there's any country on earth which condones this. It's all against the law. So sometimes there can be legal ramifications. Maybe this case is in court or is being taken to court. So if you do not understand the legality of these cases, which are criminal in nature, It can affect the reporting of gender-based violence and discrimination. And just before we move forward, there is oh, sorry. Is there anybody who's having audio problems? I feel like I have, but anyway. Before we move forward, there's something that I'm going to share. I feel like at the end, I would need you to add on to them. But when we're talking about insensitive interviewing techniques, can you give me an example of what you would think would be an insensitive interviewing technique when it comes to interviewing people, maybe survivors or witnesses, anything to do with gender-based violence and discrimination? What techniques do you use? What techniques do you personally think help you more when it comes to covering these types of topics? Okay, Gabriel, so you can hear me.
Hello?
Yes. Yes, Mabor.
Yes, yeah. You know, the best techniques to approach, any victim of gender-based violence is when you try to hide his or her identity. You know, you can hide her own or his own identity. You can also hide his name or use only one name, so that this victim cannot be identified for some other reason, like stigma and other things, So this is the best approach, to anyone who is a victim of sexual harassment or rape or anything. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and I agree. And respecting people's privacy and hiding their identity, protecting your sources, because either gender-based violence, whether it be sexual or other harmful practices that we've talked about, like FGM and the rest, and sometimes it's happening to minors, there is a really big stigma and there's pushback. And sometimes it's a bit, it worries me that most people attack the victim. When you put out a story and people know that victim, they will start harassing that. Instead of the perpetrator, the victim will be harassed a bit more. So in cases where you feel that there's that stigma and the victim or survivor themselves do not wish to be identified, then you can take steps to protect their identity. Do not show anything that can make them be identified, whether it's, sometimes, people will put maybe their hands and they have a very identifiable feature. You blur their faces. Some people use the voice distortion to explain. Some people, you look at them from the back, they've covered themselves. So I think that's a really important technique. Yes, Carissa William. Carissa, are you there?
Okay, yeah, I think, yes, I'm getting, are you getting me?
Yes, I can get you very loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. The topic is so clear. And I just want to add something like for the victims of gender-based violence, you need to, you need to hide names. You are not supposed to maybe reveal their names when you are maybe interviewing them. You need to hide their names. And then another thing, like, okay, after you have already interviewed the person, he has talked to you, you need to later voice over that person so that his or her voice should not be maybe heard outside, because sometimes some people will know that person by their voice. They will identify. If you leave him just talk, then they will say, okay, that was so and so. They will know. That will actually maybe that person will be traumatized. People will just come around and say, okay, yesterday we had you over the radio, you spoke or A, B, C, D. So it is good for us to voice over for that person's voice not to be heard. And then another thing is the first thing you need to get, if you want to interview a person of gender-based violence, you need to first you seek for consent. You ask if they are okay, if they will allow you to interview them so that they can tell you more details.
I agree with everything you say. Yes, Lokori, Peter, you have your hand up.
Thank you very much, Joki. So to put some input on how always.
Sorry, your connection.
So eventually, we see in our community we are living the cases of GBV not being reported for some reasons.
Okay. Sorry, Peter, your connection is quite unstable.
His connection is poor. I can't hear him. Your internet is bad.
Hello?
I can't hear you.
No, we still cannot hear you. Sorry. Okay. Gabriel, Raya, I hope your connection is better.
I'm not quite sure, but I think you can hear me.
It's good. It's good.
All right, that's great. I think most of the speakers has been talking about confidentiality of the victim, but there is one thing which I see it's a little bit more important. I mean, the safety of the victim is also something that we have to focus on. Like talking about safety, I'm trying to mean like a referral, because if you get the case you can have some interviews and get more information that you are interested in. But then maybe when you are conducting the interview, maybe the husband or some of the family members might have seen you maybe interviewing the woman, specifically if the victim was a woman. Now, at your absence, the safety of the victim is not guaranteed here. So I think referring the case to maybe the police or some organizations that deals with gender-based violence, I think it can be something helpful to the safety of the woman,
I fully agree. There's this thing by journalists where you get the story at all costs. And that is ethically, that is not right. So what you need to do is look at the victim by giving her or she or him giving you your story, giving you her story. Does that put the victim or the survivor in danger? Because there are people who you will come and you will question, they can tell you, but they have people who are watching them. So one, the location of where you conduct your interviews, who you speak to, and is that person still in imminent danger is something to consider. Thank you very much. Lochapio Elizabeth. Oh, finally tonight, finally we hear from a lady. That's nice. Elizabeth?
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you for giving me this chance. So what I want to add on is the issue of consent also, because here when we interview, we ensure that we get the consent from the parents, especially when we are trying to get the information maybe about the minor. We cannot interview the underage children. So what we can do, we can interview one of the relatives and we ensure we get the consent. So that is the first thing which is very important, so that in case of anything, you as a journalist should have evidence that I took the permission from so and so. And sometimes such cases, like for gender-based violence, it is very sensitive, and getting such stories is difficult. There was a story I tried following this side of Capoeira East County, whereby a teenage girl was implemented by a 23-year-old man. So, and the girl was given a drug to abort the child. So I tried finding ways on how to cover the story, but it was difficult. Even the relatives could not speak about it, maybe because they were fearing of the information going out and so on. So what I did is I had to find ways of getting that story from the police in Capoeira East. So I looked at the angle of arrest where the suspect was arrested. So that's how I got the story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I agree. It can be very difficult. And the stigma surrounding sexual-based violence, especially for minors, is really, really high, in that sometimes the people who are hiding the perpetrators are the family themselves. The people who are hiding, the people who are committing these things is the community. So it's something that is really, really, really sensitive. I agree. So somebody had said, rape cases are rarely reported in my community in fear of shame and culture. That is very true. It happens so many places. In fact, in some communities where, in Kenya, where I'm from, rape is not considered something that is a police matter. It's considered something for the elders to discuss. So you will take it to the elders, and then the elders will discuss, and then maybe fine the perpetrator a certain amount of money, and then you're supposed to just, forget about it. So even when you're going to report on that, you're going to find a very closed community. If that community believes that those things should be handled that way, and you're trying to go and break open that story, it's not something that people want to discuss or people want to talk about. Okay, you say your hand is up. Sorry, I don't have your name written there. It just comes as Samsung SM.
It's okay. This is Christombella. This is Christombella.
Yeah.
Okay, another lady speaking. In this case, I'm talking in the part of the confidentiality. When taking the story or when interviewing the person or covering the all, being confident, it's confidentiality. It's only the first party, which is the person, and the second party is you. So the information shouldn't be at the third party. The third party goes to when you are already shared, when you've already put the blow on the face of the victim and the voice over. But again, you won't go to the community or to a friend, because these days we don't have any trustee. You don't trust anybody. You don't go like, that voice over voicing, you're hearing this is so and so with the case of this and this, A, B, C, D, confidentiality is the best. Of course, when you share out the story, and yet it's against the ethics of journalism or the ethics of how you cover the story, it still traumatizes and gives stigma to this person when it goes viral. You get, so it's much important. You shouldn't give the information to the third party.
I think that's a very, very good point. So when you have already done that and you put out your story, you've really covered your victim, but then you go to your local and you're having 2 beers with your friend and you're like, oh, you see that story I did. I think it's a very, very, very good point that people overlook. Thank you very much. So let's move on and we look at the ethical considerations when reporting gender-based violence. I feel like we have covered a lot of these things in the discussion that we've had, but we'd still, because these are quite important, we'd still like to sort of reiterate on them. So the first thing, as a journalist, you have a duty to inform people. And when you have a duty to inform people and you're reporting on gender-based violence, it's really important to distinguish between something that is in the public interest versus what is of interest to the public. So it is in the public interest to understand that these things happen, and we need to be aware of this. And maybe these are the steps that you should take. But sometimes what the public wants to know is a bit different. Public, they really like the morbid details of what you have. They want a detailed account of what happened. So you might find yourself falling into that trap of giving the public what it wants, what is of interest to them, rather than what is in the public interest. Because what you're trying to do is look out for the public good. When you're trying to inform people about these things, it is your duty as a journalist to inform. It's also your duty sometimes in some other places to entertain, but this is not the time. So you should understand that while you're writing these stories, what is your aim? Your aim is to inform the public about what is happening. These are the kind of things that are happening. We are raising awareness. We are trying to make people understand that these things happen and they're happening right in our backyard, and what exactly are the steps that we should take, because you could include all that. Maybe this case is happening, it's with the police at this time, or this and this has happened. So for that awareness to reach either potential victims or parents to know how to deal with it, or just the public at large. But in sometimes you can be, there are people who can, the other journalists who can be sort of roped into the issue of starting to give salacious details that have nothing to do with nothing. Maybe that's what the public would love to see, because, the things that sell, we know as journalists, there are stories that sell, but this is not the place and time to do that. So you need to take your duty to inform very, very seriously. We've already talked about accuracy, but getting the facts right, they should be the main aim when you're trying to report on GBV cases. You need to ensure that everything you're saying and everything you're writing or talking about is very factually correct. You should be specific. When you mention gender-based violence, you don't attempt to report on criminal proceedings, for example. If something is in court, you cannot just say, oh, if this person is found guilty, they will be jailed for 10 years. And you do not know, you have not gone back, you've not read that act, you don't know, like, for example, what this person is being accused of is just maybe harassment. Some people who are being accused of, because they usually come in strata, they're stratified, the kind of charges. So we need to be extremely accurate in what we report, what happened and what is happening now, what are the ramifications, either for the victim or for the perpetrator themselves. The next ethical consideration we have is fairness. And this is for you as a journalist. So you should always be very fair and honest with your interviews. If you are conducting interviews, you need to be very fair and honest with them. There are several people who've talked about the issue of consent. But I feel like consent is not really complete as a thing, because consent needs to be informed. This is informed consent. Because consent is just, hey, can I interview this for this story? And you say yes. But if this person is giving informed consent, means they understand what can happen should they give you that story. Because of the stigma that we all know, we have discussed it here. Like the example we have been given, where somebody can be giving you this interview and maybe the person who meted that violence out on them or their family members are there listening. Then what happens? Or what if you interview someone, then you did it in the marketplace. In as much as you're going to hide their face and everything, people saw you with that person and they know maybe what happened and everything. So I feel like we should really try and tell these people, the people who are speaking on the record, because a lot of people have spoken on the record and later have faced a lot of backlash just from that. You take a story, you post it online, and the kind of comments that these things have, people online, they are anonymous. They don't have to show their faces. They will say anything. So I feel like we need to have a bit of sense of fairness. We should be very fair and honest with people we interview with such heavy issues. Number 4, we have talked about impartiality. We need to be impartial. We know and we understand we all have biases. We have biases from, our upbringing, our community, our culture, our beliefs and everything. But when reporting about GBV cases, we need to just try and stay very impartial. And the first thing you have to do is recognize that you have your own biases. When you recognize your own biases, you will find a way to mitigate them. But if you walk around thinking, oh, me, this thing, you don't even think about, what do I think about this thing? Because when I asked, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? There's somebody who said, how does this affect me as a person? I think that's a very good question to ask yourself. And there are people to whom, if they go and they listen to such stories, it affects them personally on a mental level, on a psychological level. It goes maybe against the kind of beliefs that you have. So impartiality is very important. You need to approach the story from a point of objectivity. You need to be objective and fact-based. So if you stick to just the facts and stop doing a commentary on it. I mean, it's okay if you're doing a commentary, if that piece is supposed to be a commentary, but even your commentary is supposed to be backed by facts. So it's not our job to be a judge or a jury. It's our job to report. It's our job to be journalists. It's our job to report the facts as they are and leave the rest to other people. So the fourth ethical consideration is impartiality. We have discussed the next two, the issue of respecting people's privacy and protecting your sources. And let me start with protecting your sources. And this protection, you don't just give it to the victim, you give it to everyone who's involved in that story, because it could be the victim, the person who brought them, there's somebody who connected you to it, because maybe this story you heard about it from somebody else who took you there to that victim. So there should be a chain of protecting, sources. And I'm sure you all know how to do that. We've talked about blurring face and names and everything, maybe using fake names to do it. So even in your own newsroom, it should not be something that is known by all, because you can be doing your bit to protect your sources, and maybe your colleague doesn't. Maybe this story, he or she did not go with you, did not understand what this victim is going through, and so can take that chance to sort of blow this up. So we need to do our best to see how we can protect the people who talk to us, because a lot of communities shun the people. Whistleblowers are never liked in any sort of community. And a lot of these victims, they're victimized over and over. They're victimized when the gender-based violence happens to them. They're victimized when people find out and blame the victim. They're victimized maybe when their story comes out and people start making bad comments about it. They're victimized when their community finds out that you talked, the family or the perpetrator, they find out you talked. So they're victimized over and over, and we should sort of remove that one step of victimization in ensuring that their privacy and they are protected. We just protect their identity at all costs. And respecting privacy goes along the same route. You respect the privacy of both the gender-based violence survivor and their families. So don't give out information that can help people. Let me tell you, I don't know how it happens in your place, but online, my countrymen can all apply for FBI jobs and get them. They can just take one thing, one identifying feature and find you. So if there's one thing, maybe it's a dress that they're wearing, a piece of jewelry or something that can make people find them and make people identify them, just please leave it out. So make sure you respect people's privacy and really protect your sources. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute and come back here. And there's a board that I had put up that has a lot of this, what to do and what not to do when you're interviewing a GBV survivor. So if you look in your charts, I've put up a link to the idea boards. So I have a list of do's and don'ts. You can add on to them. We have had some very nice discussion today. So you can use this and just add either on the side of do's. There's right next to the do's, there's an icon with a plus sign, or next to the don'ts, there's an icon with a plus sign. So you can just, if you read through and you find that there's one that we have missed and we have discussed here, you can just add to it as we go along. And we will look at it when we finish. We'll look at it at the end of it and see. Yeah. Okay. I'll go back to sharing. Okay. So when we're talking about all this, looking at the story from all angles, whether you're reporting it firsthand in that you have interviewed someone or you're reporting from another source, we said what we're trying to do in this thing is look at it from a survivor-centered approach. Yeah, and what a survivor-centered approach seeks to do is to empower the survivors by putting them at the center of the reporting process. So when I asked the question of how the best practices for interviewing, there's somebody who said you should put yourself in the shoes of the survivor. And I feel like that is usually the best place to start. In as much as we're looking at ethical ways, we're also looking at people being empathetic. In that when you put yourself in this person's shoes, what would you want the process to look like? And so if you put them at the center of the reporting process and prioritize their best interests, safety, confidentiality, respect, and non-discrimination, then it will stop looking like a victim blaming. Also, there was the issue raised of we should stop blaming the victim. So if we look at a survivor-centered approach, the issue of blaming the victim, or why were they there? I don't know what clothes were they wearing, or such things. Did they really know the person they were going to see? Or somebody cannot do this, cannot do that. So if we look at a survivor-centered approach, and that is putting the survivor at the center of it all, the story should come from them. Again, the issue of consent. Each survivor has the right to decide who should know the story and what should happen next. We talked about not just consent, but informed consent that should take us as we are writing the stories. So these are just some tips that I had. The first one is you need to give the victim or the survivor a voice where possible if they want to speak out, and you make sure your language does not blame the victim. The second one is quite important. I don't know, we missed this when we were discussing. So the thing is, when you're interviewing people about issues of gender-based violence, any sort of violence that have occurred, when you go to interview, say, maybe family members of the perpetrator, especially, and sometimes it is actually the same family, the victim and the perpetrator come from the same family, and you go to interview maybe the neighbors or the family, they will have things to say like, oh, nobody even knows him like that. We did not even know this person is capable of doing that. Or, this person, they just live a good life. So they would sort of, there's a way they try to turn the narrative into making the person who was the aggressor to be a sympathetic sort of person. So it would help sometimes if you talk to experts in that field. I believe you are experts in your own field, but also we have social workers and psychologists, maybe law enforcement agencies who can provide a better insight than people who do not further the conversation at any point. And the third one is you need to be very precise in your choice of words and you use appropriate vocabulary. I've given an example there of sexual harassment versus sexual assault or rape. Those things are not interchangeable. So whenever you're writing about them, you need to understand what each means, especially in terms of what has happened to the victim, what was done to them. We need to be very careful in how we label things. So those are tips. Before we move on to the issues of gender equality as we move towards finishing, do we have any question, anything to comment on? Oh, sorry. Was I breaking from another person's point? I'm seeing William saying I was breaking a lot from his side. Yes, William.
Yeah, yes, you are breaking a little bit on my side. I just want to maybe take you back, like some of the impacts of gender-based violence in our communities. Can you tell us some of the impacts?
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
You are not getting me clearly?
Oh, I can get you now.
Hello? Yeah, I was saying like some of the impacts of gender-based violence. I did not pick you there well. Can you maybe just in a bullet point tell me what are some of the impacts of gender-based violence?
So you want to know what are the impacts of gender-based violence?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, we had not spoken about this, but gender-based violence has it's the impacts range from short-term, to long-term effects, and the short-term effects can include things like the victims themselves who are going through that. Of course, they go through a very hard time psychologically. These are things that not only break people as individuals, but they break families. And the family is, of course, at the community level, the first unit, the main unit is the family. And so when this violence, violence breaks the family, then it breaks the community. So if we start with, in no particular order, the first one, physical violence towards anyone really, towards people in the community, or towards, if it's intimate partner violence, we know the effects of that on the victim, on the children in the home, on the neighbors or anyone who is witnessing that kind of thing, how children grow up, how their sort of mindset is framed by that gender-based violence. And if we are looking towards, for us, heading towards hate-free communities, looking at issues of physical violence, that is not the way we get there. Sexual violence has a very, very big impact on the individual as it is, and also I would think the community. So it can lead to a lot of things. It has led to people committing suicide, people having a lot of mental issues. I think from there, harmful practices like FGM. I saw somebody asked something about FGI. I was talking about FGM, which is female genital mutilation, what they call female circumcision. And for that, it has a really big effect on the girls as they grow up, has an effect on them physically, with getting their periods. It's quite hard in giving birth, in even having intimate relationships when they get married. And I feel like it's also sort of leads to child marriages, because where I come from, if girls are subjected to FGM, they also are considered adults, they're considered women at that point. And so that leads to child marriages. And of course, if 50%, which we look at women being 50% of the population, is removed from the workforce, not given a choice, not given any sort of agency, what happens to that community? That community just remains lagging behind all the time, not to mention the kind of effects, health-wise, mental or physical, that it has on the victim themselves. And somebody who has gone through that, they have that, there's a probability of it being propagated over and over and over. So physical, sexual, or traditional practices, I would say, such violences, they give rise to a community that is experiencing a lot of breakdowns, I would say. Yeah? Does that answer your question? Sorry, I don't remember who's saying it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So any other questions? I agree. I'm just looking through some comments here. I agree with Elizabeth that threats are always high, especially if it's something that happened within the family. And like I said, for a lot of people, they believe that this sort of violence is a family issue, is not a police issue. So if you leave and go report something to the police station, they see you as a traitor, basically. They put their weight behind the perpetrator, and so you now become the hunted. Yeah. Okay. I guess then we can move on.
Yes,
sorry. Yes.
Yeah, let me hope you are getting me clearly.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to share an experience that I had last year. And I just wanted to share, I don't know whether it could be a comment or a question in the side of like trying to balance a GBV story. And then, there was an alarming issue here in WOW last year, the issue of girls selling things. And they moved late, up to late hours at night. And then a lot of the stories were actually coming up from that issue. And then we have tried as an institution to approach the Ministry of Gender and then also approach the Special Protection Unit at the police because they're the one responsible for such kind of things. And then after reaching to the Ministry of Gender was like to take a step and then gather some of these girls, talk to them, ask them what are the reasons they are telling those things. And then they went to the police and they find out that some women normally use them to be selling things, and then at the end, the capital return to them. These are not even their relatives, not their mothers. So the police, the Special Protection Unit at the police, took the initiative of taking those people to the police station. And when we went to the police headquarters, I was actually surprised by the way how they responded to us. They were like, you guys are collecting these kids and you are taking people to the prison. Does the Ministry of Gender actually have the capacity to be taking care of these children? Does the Ministry of Gender have the capacity to be providing support to their families? Because they believe that their families didn't have anything. That's why they sent out these girls to go and sell those things. So it was actually a bit difficult to write the story. But at the end of the day, we decided just to write that story like that with only the voice of the Ministry of Gender without the police, because we were unable to balance the story and get like a comment from the police confirming that yes, they have arrested those people and they are going to take like legal procedures against that. So we wanted actually just the community to know that it is not actually good to send young girls to sell things up to at night for late hours, and then they face violence after that. But unfortunately, we just published that story like that, and then we were unable to get support from the police.
And they were like, you Voice of Hope, you don't have anything to be running about with the exception of such kind of stories. So sometimes I just find it difficult, like to get support in terms of supporting publishing stories that talks about gender-based violence. So it was actually one of the shocking things that happened. So I don't know what will be your comment in that, and I would like also to get your advice on such cases. What can we do like that to go ahead with the reporting of GBV? Thank
you. Thank you very much. So I feel like there's some issues that are never just restricted to one place, because that is something we also have been battling with. There has been the cases of not just girls being sent to sell things, because it's really bad. Sometimes it's 9, 10 p.m., you're in a place where alcohol is being sold, and here comes this young girl who's selling, I don't know, chewing gum or something of the sort. And it's always a big problem. But also, there's a case we were working on where in the slums of Kenya, in Kibera, young girls are told, as young as 10, 11, 12, you're given a specific bill in the house, and your mother tells you you're the one who's going to be in charge of providing, I don't know, food for the house or something. So you just know what you're going to do about it. And of course, that leads the young girl to go, where will she go and look for money? That calls for some level of child prostitution. And there has always been an issue of, when you're talking about that, the question people ask you is, then what are you doing about it? See, the only thing we can do is raise awareness, because also when you go to the police, like for us, our police also have something that is called a gender desk, and it's supposed to be manned by somebody who is just there about issues of women and children. But even them, I don't know what it is they have seen, or they do not seem to want to support us in that case. And so the only thing we can do as at now is raise awareness, try to find, because for us also, we need to call, we call everyone. We don't always get the support that we need, yeah? But you still have to put the story out there. You might get backlash from here, from there, but the public needs to know, the community needs to know that these things are happening. And that's where we come in as journalists. We need to let people know that this is happening. And sometimes you make enough sort of noise, especially online, and then something can start to happen from there. So do not let that be a barrier to you. If there is a story and you need to write it, you always look for support. And sometimes even when you do not have that support, you just carry on. So for us, we usually have a network of these civil society groups that deal a lot with GBV, which means they deal a lot with the police. So if you talk to them, if you try to find these organizations that deal with survivors and victims of GBV, they can take you along a certain way. But the issue of being blamed, we know about it. Sometimes you can even go there to try and write something and people tell you, you people, you have funding. People have given you money to come write our stories. You're getting money off of us, and then you're not giving us anything. You're not helping us take care of our families. It always happens, but the thing is, you have to write your story. But just write it ethically, follow the guidelines. For GBV, do not out anyone who does not want to be shown, and just, write your story. It's very, very important that the community gets to know that these things are happening. So Mabio Riak, you say police desk and child desk on gender issues is very key, and these are the right sources one needs to ask when it comes to such within cases in the community. Yes, I agree. But just having the desk there, sometimes it helps, but also it has to come from the top. The goodwill has to come from the top, because just having the desk there does not help. But if you have people who are actually willing to help you and they are manning this desk, the laws are there. In Kenya, they really fought for those laws and they put them there. But now also getting them to work is something else. But I agree, it's something that is really, really needed. Okay. So anyway, let's move on to the last thing we're supposed to cover, which is promoting gender equality. And for that, we're going to look at something that is called the equality wheel. Yeah, and we're going to look at it from a holistic point of view, the issue of gender equality. And you can just pick from somewhere, you know, when you're looking at it, you can just pick any box from anywhere. It will be talking about something different to do with gender equality. So when we start at the top, what we mean by equality is that no discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, religion, cultural practices, race or ethnicity, and it includes no harmful practices. So in terms of equality, we're just talking about the discrimination we had discussed, the discrimination that is just purely based on the fact that you are either a man or a woman. So equality just means remove that discrimination, those obstacles that come with, you say, oh, you know, if this is a person from this gender, then this is where they should reach. We should not give them this, we should not do this. So if you remove that discrimination, yeah, and then at that point, we can actually say we are heading towards equality. I know this is something that we have discussed, the issue of men cannot abuse or dominate, but also in the other, when you turn it around, yeah, there is also that belief that men are the heads of the household and so they cannot be abused by their women. If we're going to look at equality and we're going to look at it from a holistic point of view, those are the things that we need. Those are the kind of beliefs that, you know, we need to leave behind. So we're looking at freedom and justice. We're looking for respect, acceptance, and dignity for everyone. We expect everybody to be treated in the same way. We believe that women's and girls' rights are humans' rights. Somebody has commented about that issue of desks. So laws, police, and courts offer the same protection to everyone, access to education. And if we follow it from like a point of view, looking at it from all angles, in the home, in the workplace, on the street, at school, everywhere, then we will have achieved, this is called a 360-degree equality wheel, which means it looks at it from every point of view. I'm especially passionate about the issue of equality in the workplace. So what we are trying to say is, we're not saying just offer me a job because I am a woman or because I am a man, but offer equal opportunities. If somebody comes and they have the same qualifications, we pay them the same. Doesn't matter if you're a man or you're a woman, your consideration, we consider you, you know, according to your personal qualifications, according to your experience, not according to what gender you are. Also policies to ensure no harassment, abuse, or discrimination, which is something that is really big, especially in workplaces. You find a lot of places in their HR departments, they have a whole booklet on the issues of sexual harassment as it is. So it's usually something I'm quite passionate about. I have a background in HR, and that used to be what I concentrated on most. So unless anybody has a question, this is something I feel we've come in here with enough information about the issues of equality and promoting gender equality. So I will move to something that I find to the question, like, what can we do about it? You know, if we do know, yes, about gender inequality, and we are all working to ensure that we have equality in any space that we're in, then what can we do? There's something called the inequality triangle. And in the inequality triangle, the first thing you do when you come in is to scan the room. The room can be anywhere you are. It can be your workplace. It can be, you know, any space that you're in. It doesn't have to be like somewhere you physically are. It just means, you know, whatever space you find yourself in, whether it's at work, at church, at anywhere, just scan the room, yeah? Anywhere where there are opportunities, I would say. And when you scan the room, you're looking to see, is everyone represented? And if women are represented, yeah? Are you looking for, because sometimes in as much as women are represented, we really tend to take women who are at the top, you know, and we seem to forget that there are people like lower down the totem pole, people with from lower economic means, people with disabilities, people from different ethnic groups. So you always scan the room. You, just because you're there, you know, you can feel like, you know, me, I'm here, everybody else should be there by their own merit. But you scan the room and you look to see, are you properly represented, or is the group just, you know, representing some very few people? Because representation is really, really important in any space. And so when you scan the room, what you do is you create within yourself awareness. So if you notice that not everyone is represented, then what do you do about it? Do you mention it to those who are present in the room with you? Do you raise awareness to other people? I think that should be the next step that you do. If you're aware that, you know, this space, because for a lot of us, we are done in by our silence. You know, you come in and you see, hey, maybe something is not right around here, but you just keep quiet. You know, you come in to work and you realize, because in Africa, there's the whole thing of tribalism. You come in and you realize every single person in this office is from, you know, my tribe or one tribe or something, but you just, when we're trying to write down something, guidelines or policies, you realize there are people who are not represented, but we keep quiet about it. So the minute you have the awareness, then what do you do about it? Maybe try to reach out to someone, discuss it with people, because when you start the conversation, when people are aware, because, you know, there are some people who can have just come in and there are people who have seen it, but are not also seeing it. So we are also being called to be conversation starters. So scan the room, be aware, and then the next step is the solution. You address the gender inequality and you think of actual solutions. And then the actioning comes in with implementing the solutions and putting them to action. So what I would like you to do is to start thinking about your own workspaces, your own community activities, scan your spaces. In fact, we should just scan this space right now and see, is it inclusive? I think that's where we all start. We scan spaces and look at it and see in terms of inclusivity. And sometimes we will include women when you're talking about minorities, but then we forget other people. We forget, you know, people living with disabilities. We forget people coming from other minorities. So I think this should be a challenge to all of us when we're trying to look at the issue of promoting gender equality. We always ask ourselves, what can I do about it? You know, we look at it like it's the problem of somebody else. It's a really big problem. It's a problem that has to come from people who campaign about it, from parliament, from people who make laws. But the thing is, what can we personally do about it in our own space? I think that's a good question. And I was reading some statistics about especially women in journalism, and it's very dismal. Even in issues of reporting gender-based violence, they're looking at the percentage of, they're looking at a section of gender-based violence stories in Africa, and the percentage of it written by men was about 76%, and only 24% were written by women. And this is something that, and when you look at the stories, they were largely like over 90% of them were written about women, but were written mostly by men. So I think this is something that we need to sit down and look at and see, like, do we have, what kind of obstacles, what is preventing us from having sort of a more balanced sort of room that we come into? Yeah. And okay, before we discuss that, because these are just going to get into stories, I would like for people to share with me, the kind of stories they have about people who break barriers, women who actually break barriers in your community. Sorry, I was checking messages to see if somebody had brought up something in our communities. But before we move on to that, I would like us to discuss this. Do you, as a journalist, especially the female journalists that are in the room, do you sometimes feel like you come into a room and you don't see the representation maybe that you need, or even as a man, whenever you go in the rooms as pertains to your work, do you think there's equal representation where you go? And what do you think you can do about it? Oh, we don't have volunteers for that.
Yes, can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'm sorry, my background is a little bit noisy. Well, I think sometimes there are some things that we see they are not right, mostly with workspaces or workplaces. But then we need actually to be a little bit brave and try to uh, raise our voice and talk about the issue that we are seeing. It's not in place, because women inclusivity, it's something very important in society, but to do with the workplaces, sometimes you can find there is always that gap. So I'm seeing it like we can try to advocate for women inclusivity if we find that there is no like gender violence in our workplaces.
Yeah, I agree. In these cases, advocacy is very important. Sometimes it's the only thing you can do, but yeah, I think it calls on all of us to be advocates for the cause. Okay. So I just had a few stories of people that inspire me. I hope you can share your stories of who inspires you, people who are breaking barriers. And the first is this group of ladies from South Sudan. I actually have had the pleasure of working with them. They founded an organization called Go Girls ICT. This is Yine Yankee and Eva Yai. And what I find what they do quite inspiring, because there's this whole thing of women being left behind in science. And when you look at scores in science of people who are involved in science, most of the time it's a man's world. And so for them, they believe that girls should not be left out of these issues. So in terms of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the STEM subjects, they're taking it right down to the girls at the very, very, very low level, from primary school. And they have an ICT mentorship. They try to enter young girls into ICT and science. They go, they talk to the teachers. They try to get the teachers to get the students, because, sometimes as a community, if you see something, you actually believe it. And when it comes to even doctors, scientists, people who are doing very well in IT, most of the time it's a very male-dominated world. And so I feel like for us to change the opinions and the attitudes of the community, we are going to start from both sides. We're going to start with the community and also with the children themselves to believe in themselves so that when it comes to that time, they're able to take those strides. And so I find what these two young South Sudanese ladies doing extremely inspirational. And I have worked with them and I think they're doing amazing work. I see we have, okay. And the next person we're going to look at in terms of breaking barriers is my country person. Her name is Kakenya Ntaya, and her story is also quite inspirational because she was born in the Maasai community and she underwent FGM, female genital mutilation, at the age of 13. And you know, when you go through that, you're considered a woman and you can be married off. But she went and negotiated for her education with her father, and her father allowed her to go to high school. And then for her to go to university, she had to convince all the men in the village. So she would wake up in the morning because in the community, they believe that whoever you see the first person in the morning, that person is supposed to bring you good news. So she would wake up every morning, very early in the morning, and be waiting outside the house of one community elder and ask for permission. And the next day she would wake up and go to the next community elder. And in that way, she was able to continue with her education. And the good thing is that she gave back. She came back and she opened a school for girls. And she started rescuing girls who have been, whose parents wanted them to settle in early child marriages and whose parents wanted them to go through female genital mutilation. And as per now, she has saved hundreds, perhaps even thousands of girls from that fate. And she has done so much in championing education, in championing gender equality, in ending some harmful practices that happen in her community. And yeah, we celebrate Kakenya for breaking barriers. I wish I have put, I have put some links. I will send you this presentation, but I've put some links on some of her talks, international talks that she's had. You need to go and listen and hear just how one person, where you are, you can start from wherever it is that you are and be a really, really big help to your community. And I think this is one of the things that should spur us into action, into actually doing something, because we see things that are happening. Some of us went through those things, but then when we break those barriers, we do not go back and sort of mold the next generation. So I really hope you can find time to go through her story and what she does right now and how she's contributing back to the community. And I hope that can in turn spur you to contribute to your community as well. Lastly, on my part, because I'm going to wait to hear from you, we have this group of really brave women that brought about peace in Liberia. It's called the Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. And for them, when they were starting it, they said they were tired of seeing their sons, their husbands, their fathers, you know, being recruited into fighting the fighting that never ends. So they started a wave of peaceful protests. And it started in church and in mosques. So women from the Christians and Muslims, they came together, led by a lady called Leima Bowe, who actually ended up winning the Nobel Peace Prize. And they staged sit-ins, they staged protests. They would just come dressed in all white and just sit. And they brought the whole country to a standstill. And what's interesting is that when the peace talks were happening, of course, inside those peace talks, inside the rooms, there were absolutely no women. It was just men. But they sort of made a ring around that room. And anytime the men would not come to an agreement and would want to leave, they would be forced back by the woman, forced back into the room. And they stayed in that room until the time they came to an understanding and to an agreement. And so that led to the peace that is being experienced in Liberia right now. And also led to the election of the first female president, because right after they managed to to have the peace talks be successful, they went on the campaign trail, and it ended up in the election of the first Liberian female president, who is President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. I also have tagged their story in the annexes. You can go out and check for them. But the thing is, there is nothing that women cannot do if they put their minds to it. And I will, on the basis of the stories that I have given you, have some call to action quotes. And the first one is from that group of Liberian women. And the quote is from Lema Bowe, who organized all those, brought all those women together. And I thought it was poignant in that there's always two sides to a story. And she says, when the stories of Liberian women are told, it will be told in two parts. Women as victims and fighters, because as you well know, women are usually such, whenever war happens, the women are victims in many ways. They're victims of physical violence, but also there's a lot of mass rape that happens. They lose their husbands, they lose their sons, they lose their own lives. You know, you're homeless, you have to take, maybe your husband was a fighter, they already took your son away to go fight. So women have to take up and go. And also, back then in the Civil War, there are also women who are being recruited to fight. So there were women as victims and fighters, the traditional stories of rape and violent abuse, and also now the second part, which I really like, women's victory over the callous display of patriarchy and political violence. And the second one, it goes to all of us. The question is, what can we do in terms of, for everything we've talked about, gender-based violence, we've talked about discrimination, we've talked about promoting equality, gender equality. And this quote comes from Kakenya Ntaya, and she says, and she said this during one of her TED Talks, when she was talking about her decision to go back and be the light for her community as is. And she says, be the first and people will follow you. Be bold, stand up, be fearless, be confident, move out, because as you change your world, as you change your community, as we believe that we are impacting one girl, one family, one village, and one country at a time. And I hope that that is what we all are called to do. Yes, chase the devil back. It's actually called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, Giletta. Very, very, very good. And yeah, so that's it for me, unless we have any questions that we have. I will take questions. Any questions, any comments? Let me just ask then a direct question to Giletta, who has watched that movie, Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Just if you can, I don't know if you can actually just unmute yourself and just tell us what you thought about the whole thing and did it spur you to do anything? Because the time I watched it, and I watched women come from these are low income women from rural areas who came in and decided, you know what, enough is enough. And they actually brought an end to a 14-year civil war. So I would really like to know your opinion on what you thought about it.
Yeah, by the time I've watched this movie, I actually felt that any one of us and all the kind of women with their different groups, if they really come together as the Liberian women did, we can really do a great work. Because as you have stated, there were women from different backgrounds, and most importantly, there were women from also different religious backgrounds, the Muslims and the Christians. By that time, they came together. They decided that when the Christian goes to the church, they can talk about it. when the Muslims go to the mosque, they can talk about it. And they were able to influence their religious leaders, and they were able to influence their political leaders by standing together, as they have stated. When the political leaders go for a meeting, they come and surround the room and stand. To the extent their leader was like, if you people are going to chase us, I'm going to remove my clothes and be naked. So if really the community or women can come together as they have did, I know we can really do wonders, or women can really do wonders.
I really agree.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Yeah. You know, I just want to a little bit add to what the Liberian women did, to what South Sudanese women also did in 2000. That was before the signing of Comprehensive Peace Agreement, the CPA, with Khartoum government. You know, in during that time, you know, there was a misunderstanding, you know, between the Dr. John Garang and the current president. We led to Dr. John Garang to be in Rumbek and Nairobi, and Salva Kiir was in Ye. So from there, the women, during that time, it was a very serious situation, because the people were about, you know, people were going for peace, and then there was a likelihood of misunderstanding here, you know. So the women mobilized themselves in the bush, and they reconciled these two ladies. I mean, two leaders. Among them was one of the MP now, is a national MP. She is called Monica Yan Magwat, was spearheading the discussion. She went to Ye to meet Salva Kiir, and then he came back to Rumbek to meet Dr. John Garang, and the two leaders were reconciled. You know, if you could actually get the picture where Salva Kiir hold hands with Dr. John Garang, it was a role of women. Women brought these two leaders together in Rumbek, and they reconciled. You see, until they reconcile and they unite, until the peace agreement was signed, without any other misunderstanding between both two leaders, the commander-in-chief and the deputy commander-in-chief. So they came together. You see, you know, we really appreciate the role of women. Women, you know, have a very great role in reconciling the political leaders, especially political leaders. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Like I said, we are all here to learn. I'm really, really happy to hear that, because now I have something to add on to my repertoire. When I'm doing this the next time, then I will read up on the issue of women in South Sudan, bringing together the two leaders. And now many people will get to know about it. Thank you very much. So we have 3 minutes. Anyone has anything to say in the 3 minutes before we leave?
Yeah,
Yes,
you can.
yes, Julieta.
Not going very far. You can also on what the women in South Sudan did during the peace agreement, because I know that women have done a lot, and some other women from the civil society, they were not actually having, they were not provided the tickets to go to Addis Ababa to attain the peace agreement. They went on their own, and they could have a meeting outside, and then can share with the women who are with the political women at the political position who are representing women. So you see how they come together during that time, even though they are not together, but they could stay outside, chat, and like come up with one idea and share with their other fellow women. So you can also ask any other civil society women in South Sudan, and they can really tell you more about what women in South Sudan did during the peace agreement, the recent revitalized peace agreement. This is what I just wanted to add. Next time you're doing that, you can also include it.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Elizabeth Agum.
Actually, mine is just a comment.
Okay.
I'm so glad of how you taught us today. I'm really touched, and I'm ready to take action, actually, because these things have been happening around us, especially. I won't say the story now, maybe next time, but it's like one of them happened around me in my family. And hearing your lectures today, I feel like I should stand up. I should talk about it. I should report this thing. I should help also. Even if it's not affecting me, it's affecting my loved ones. It's affecting ladies, actually. So that was just my comment. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You're very welcome, and I wish you well in case of anything. I think I will leave my number with Bida. You can contact me in case you need any help with that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yes, William, as we close, you have a minute. Hi, William.
Okay,
William.
yeah, thank you. Yes. Now, I think a lot of guys have already spoken. I just want to give a brief. One of the women in Budi County, Abidinga by tribe in Eastern Equatorial State. So back in around 1992, this woman really played a bigger role in uniting the community of Dodos from Uganda and Idinga of Budi County in Lotuke. So this woman played a bigger role. She brought the two communities together, and up to now, from around 1992 up to now, these people are together. They are living peacefully at the border between Uganda and South Sudan. So it was through the effort of that woman that the two communities live in peace up to date. So women in our society, they are very much strong. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I always appreciate when